Joining me today for the interview is Hedreich Nichols. Hedreich is an author, an educator, a consultant, helping educators and districts amplify the voices of all students. Her YouTube series and podcast, Small Bites, further helps campuses amplify student voices by focusing on equity in education and helps educators create more culturally responsive classrooms and campuses. Hedreich's upcoming book, entitled Finding Your Blind Spots, and we are definitely going to talk about that book today, provides educators with guiding principles to help them become more culturally responsible. So, Hedreich, really excited to have you here. Welcome to the Tom Schimmer podcast.
Thank you, Tom. Glad to be here.
I'm so glad to have you here. I have to say, I'm a loyal listener of Small Bites. I can't wait to read your book. So I'm thrilled to have you here. So let's get right into it, because I know we're going to hit some very substantive topics today. And I honestly can't wait to get your perspective. And I want to begin with both a simple and a complex question. The question is it possible, or are we poised to become hyper-focused on race? The idea that we will get to the point where we lose perspective slightly and potentially see race everywhere, where maybe even it's not. Are we on the verge of that? Or help me understand that that's not necessarily a perspective that you share.
You know what? I love that you asked that question, because it's a conversation I have with some of my white friends. And to provide a little context for our listeners, let me ask you a couple of questions.
All right.
Have you ever gone shopping with your mom and seen a sign that said, if you can read, well, you're not that. So if you can read, white boy, run. If you can't read, run anyhow.
I have never seen that.
Okay. Have you ever embraced your crying 17-year-old because after church, he got stopped on a long stretch of road? They said it was a random stop. They took everything out of the car. They screamed at him, stop, get your hands off the steering wheel. I don't want you driving off. And we've talked about how to behave in a traffic stop. They searched everything. They screamed at him, I know you're on drugs. Why are you shaking if nothing's wrong? Have you ever had that happen to anyone in your circle?
I can easily say that has never happened to me or anyone in my circle.
Has anyone ever asked to touch your hair at work?
No. No.
Have you ever, do you have kids, by the way? I don't even know if you have kids.
I do. Okay. I have two.
Has one of your kids ever come back and said, Mom, the guy down the street asked me what I was doing over here and told me to go skate in my own neighborhood, because we live in a neighborhood that is largely white?
No, that has not happened, no.
Okay, so when people ask me, are we hyper-focused on race? I want to just say, I wish I could not focus it. I wish it was a luxury that I had to not focus on race. You've heard Small Bites. Almost every time it's an anecdote, something happens, and it seems like we just can't get a week. We just can't get a break. There's always something that happens. And my son's father is German, so theoretically he's biracial, but I've always raised him as a Black male because I knew what he'd be confronted with. Mm-hmm. And as long as he was little and he had the little cute little curls and, oh my gosh, Hedreich, he's just beautiful, it was fine. But once he got taller than me and grew facial hair, and now he wears a kind of a wild Eric Bonet kind of he's a musician, he's a bassist, kind of wild, cool afro. All of a sudden now he's perceived as a threat.
Right.
And he didn't change. He's still the sweet little boy he always was, with a deeper voice and some more manly swag. Yeah. But the world perceives him differently. And so unfortunately, for people who look like me, we don't have the luxury of not focusing on race, because either we are letting it change who we are and letting it break us, or we are advocating for change so that people will understand that my experience may not be your experience.
Mm-hmm. You bring up such a good point there with this idea of the choice, because obviously, and I want to be clear that I do not subscribe to this position, but I did want to bring it up because I hear this in society, that there is a counter narrative about, being hyper-focused on race and why is everything about race. And yet, I, as a white male, have the choice to turn off sort of the race idea, turn off the idea that I can turn off thinking about race. I can get exhausted by race. And then for others, of course, like yourself, you just can't get away from those experiences, and you wish that you could get away from those experiences. So let me ask you this: what do you think it would take? I know this is a massive question, but what is it going to take for us to get to a place where we can settle into what the ideal may have always been, which is to, and I know that this term itself is not really a term that we focus on today, but this idea of being colorblind. What do you think where we could get truly to a place that we have that level of blindness, so that we truly do? What are some of the steps forward that we need to take to get there?
One thing, I think that teachers should be able to teach truth.
Right.
That's a provocative statement, but
Yeah.
I gotta put that out there because we used to talk about, when I was a little girl, we talked about citizenship. We talked about
Yeah.
what that looked like, and honestly, even though we don't explicitly talk about it a lot anymore, especially after the middle years, fourth grade and up, we still have this code of conduct, these handbooks that
Right.
talk about what citizenship is and what's expected and what's not. And now we're saying we don't want to have those conversations.
Right.
What citizenship looks like is always a bit, you feel like it one way. I always say my neighbor has dinner at 8. Her kids are all grown up and they both work from home, and they usually have dinner about 8. I know this because they're out, doing gardening about 6.
Right.
I have a kid at 9 o'clock. He's getting ready to go to bed. So we have dinner at 6. 6 has always been our dinner time. Neither of those is wrong. They're just various perspectives. So until we begin to see not perspectives that allow us to be blind to differences, but know that everybody's story is different. Everybody's
Right.
story is valuable, and everybody's story is, from my take, interesting. I think, culture is interesting as heck. I love learning things. And until we can embrace that the norm is that there's no norm, then we won't get to that place. We are always looking to make a monolith, like white. That is a construct of a monolith. But really, there were the British that came, the Vikings came, everybody who came in after the British was considered an immigrant, even though the British too were immigrants, but they were Germanic people, there were Polish, there were the Italians, there were the Spanish, there were all of these different cultures. And that became, as we grew as a nation, that became one monolithic white. And so until we deconstruct that as a norm and realize there's really no norm, then we'll always be kind of stuck.
Yeah. We get uncomfortable very quickly with conversations, and I think one of the reasons this perspective of this idea of being hyper focused on race is that people become a little uncomfortable, and they want to sweep it under the rug and say we're past that, we've moved on. But at the same time, we haven't had the conversation yet. We haven't really had the honest conversation yet to be able to say, okay, now we can move past it. It's interesting because, I've read recently Columbia professor, linguistics professor, and New York Times opinion writer, John McWhorter. He's been an outspoken critic of some of the anti-racism work that has emerged over the last couple of years. And in particular, he's really taken aim at Ibram Kendi and Robin DiAngelo for spearheading what he calls this new kind of zealous religion. And I want to read you a couple of excerpts from a recent interview with NPR that he had. And I want to get your reaction to these quotes, because these quotes really caught my attention. And I want you to put them in perspective for me and tell me how you would respond to them. So in reference to the idea that anti-racism is a religion, he said this, quote, "The way we talk about white privilege is eerily consonant with the way one talks about original sin. You have it from the beginning. It's a stain that you'll never get rid of. You're supposed to always think about it. It's there regardless of the condition of your life, and you're going to die with it. So white privilege becomes the original sin that you're supposed to live in a kind of atonement for," end quote. So that's the first quote that caught my attention. And then in reference to the criticisms that he's received, because the people are firing back at him and saying, listen, do you not understand that systemic racism exists? To that criticism, he has said, quote, "I know that those inequalities exist. I think those inequalities must be battled." He said, "The issue is, what do you do to battle them?" And he says, telling people not to be racist or thinking of these inequities as some abstract version of bigotry doesn't help people who actually need the help. So if end quote. So if John McWhorter were with us today, how would you respond to his criticism of anti-racism and just his overall sentiment with where the anti-racist movement is today?
I think I would say to him what I kind of like to say to everybody. Why are we judging the motivations of others?
Yeah.
Maybe Kendi and D'Angelo, maybe they think of it like a religion, and maybe they don't. Has he spoken to them? Has he talked to them about their journey, and talked to them about how they've built their work on what foundation they've built their work? I if there's one thing that kind of gets under my skin, it's both sides spending more time talking about the way the other packages the messaging
Right.
than confronting the problem. So that last little part that he said, that's where we need to get to. Can you read that for me one more time?
Yeah, he said that, I say that telling people not to be racist or thinking of those inequities as some abstract version of bigotry doesn't help the people who actually need help.
That's the part. We focus on you are anti-racist, you're a racist, you are a liberal, you're a Democrat, you're a Republican, you're white, right wing, you're left wing, left wing, you're black, you're white.
Yeah.
We are so focused on the labels
Mhm.
that we cannot get to actually what will help. The bottom for
Yeah.
me, there's one nation under God with liberty and justice for all.
Right.
When our forefathers, if they did one thing right, they did that. They wove it into our fabric that we are to be one nation under God with liberty and justice for all.
Right.
Now, there are not a lot of countries that have that ideal, really, that is grounded in a sense of justice and liberty. But that's what we have. That is the goal. That is the as yet unattained goal. And if we don't just get on board with that, one nation, first of all, not right wing, not left wing, not Democrat, not Republican. I mean, it's like, dudes, this is not the Cowboys and the Steelers. It's not about who's got the most Super Bowl rings in your team and my team. This is about, this is one nation. And so that's important. If we would stop focusing on how you're packaging the message and focus on what the disparaging outcomes are for the people who this actually happens to, who suffer from these outcomes, who experience these outcomes, then we can get to what's important. And I'm so over the uncivilized, inhumane, mad, angry, judgmental arguing about who says what and how they say it.
Yeah.
That.
It is really, it makes me think of the old adage that says, when you're in a debate, the first one that makes it personal knows they're losing the argument. And if you take that to the conversations that are currently happening now, to me, it's the first one who argues method knows they're losing the argument of ideas. I think of Colin Kaepernick. And it wasn't that, the critique wasn't that he was protesting. It was just, we didn't like the way he was protesting. So we've got to say that we didn't like that he was seated. So he was advised to take a knee. We didn't like that he took a knee. We didn't like that he was passive. We didn't like that so we constantly critique the method. And it makes me feel like when you start to critique the method and you don't like the way that they're going about it, then that's a distraction. And clearly you're not debating the idea anymore, debating the outcome you're focused on. Do you think there's some truth to that? Do you think that the argument of method is really, a way that the one side of the argument realizes that they're not on solid ground in terms of the debate or the idea?
Not only is it true, the sad state of affairs is that both sides spend way too much time arguing method, which makes me afraid for where we are as a country. We're already no longer a full democracy according to all of the UN and those kind of places. And that's scary. That's really hard to hear because, we pride ourselves on being Americans are the champions of democracy in the world. And yet we spend so much time arguing method that we as a country are on the losing side. That's so I would like to see, McWhorter's not alone. There is an archbishop in in Los Angeles, who has said
Mhm.
the same thing, that this wokeism is some new secular religion. And
Mhm.
when he says it, I can give McWhorter a bit of a pass. I just don't feel the need to judge him. But being a woman of faith, raised in a generation, fourth of 5 generations of church musicians, I take issue with an archbishop saying that this is a new religion, because one of the things that I do in my work is I say that, we look inside, look inward. And
Mhm.
if the church is saying that someone else is a religion, I would look at myself and say, oh, there must be a need that I'm not meeting, instead of pointing the finger, looking at their methods
Right.
and not like, are you kidding me? So I have a
Mhm.
real hard time. If there's something that makes me get in my feelings, it's that we can have civilized disagreements, if nothing more.
Right.
And I think we need to get to a point where we listen better. And I always say, it's easy for me to say, I know what it's like to be Black, but you don't like, I live in Texas, and I have some white people that I work with and that I'm friends with. They don't know what it's like to be Black. They don't
Mhm.
know the kinds of things they don't know that, oh, I love it when you do a Negro spiritual. She's 79 years old. She has no idea. I know that woman loves me. I know that she
Mhm.
means me no harm.
Mhm.
Am I going to say something about, oh my God, that's a racist statement? Well, no. If it comes up, I might get to say, well, we don't say Negro anymore.
Right.
I might not. It's just that we don't have to spend so much time focused in on what and the package. Let's get to the liberty and justice for all piece. They
Right.
didn't do it well. I mean, you can't say liberty and justice for all and then, break treaties with Native Americans and, the whole human trafficking piece, enslaving Africans. But they had the ideal. So let's kind of focus on that, because
Mhm.
we've got to be able to compromise. We've got to be able to talk to one another.
Right.
And, if wokeism as a religion, as a passionate, if you don't like to hear about anti-racism, then fine, go listen to someone else who talks about it in terms that you can. That's the wonderful thing about the internet. We don't have to listen to anything we don't want to. You got 144 channels of cable, and you've got the World Wide Web. So
Right.
find
Right.
something else
Exactly.
that will make someone's life better. Because at the end of
Right.
the day, I think that, especially with educators, that's really why we go into this job.
Two things come to mind. Listeners, you'll recall my interview with Mohammed Khalifa, who is the author of Culturally Responsive School Leadership, last April. And he talked about how the folks that are leading the anti racist movement don't have time to sit down and plan and get it all perfect as it's unfolding in real time. And that, just as you were answering there, Hedreich, it reminds me that, as things unfold in real time, there may be things that people do that are a little bit overzealous. There may be things that are a little aggressive, maybe too intense, but we have to understand that this is almost happening, as I said, in real time as we unfold. The other thing that came to mind as you were responding there was last week. My guest was Brian Butler, and we talked all about the limitations and the downsides and the damage that can be caused by labeling students. And yet it seems that adults in society today do nothing but define themselves by the labels that represent who they are or what they think. And it's kind of ironic that we all recognize the way that labels can limit our students and children, and yet as adults we seem to clearly define ourselves by what political party we belong to or vote for, or what movement we agree with or don't agree with. And we've reduced, whether it's CRT or whatever you want to, whatever label you want to put out there, we seem to have these binary choices behind them, and that defines who we are. So it is definitely an interesting topic. I want to come now to Hedreich, to the book. You are, of course, the author of the upcoming book, as I mentioned earlier, Finding Your Blind Spots: 8 Guiding Principles for Overcoming Implicit Bias in Teaching. And listeners, just so you know, you can pre-order that book now. It's released on December 3rd. So make sure you head over, and I'll have a link for that in the show notes for everyone. So, okay. So we recognize that we all have implicit bias to some degree, for sure. So maybe as a way of previewing the book and giving listeners and myself an idea of some of the specifics that you write about, how do we find those blind spots? And what should educators specifically do about those blind spots in, let's say, in the capacity as a teacher or an administrator? How do we find them? And then what do we do about them?
Oh my God, that's my favorite question, because, if you say the word bias, implicit bias, it appears on all of these conservative buzzword lists that we shouldn't talk about it in classroom. But cognitive bias is the way that our brains function to sort things into categories. I have this really neat example in the book where I say, okay, four-legged creature, meow, meow, cat. Walking on a trail with my kids. We're way up in West Texas, and we have brown bears. Four-legged creature, lots of fur, standing on two legs with two little cubs. Bear. Whole nother thing. I don't have to go, hey, little, oh, what a cute little four. I recognize that it's a bear. Four-legged creature. There are just a million ways that I can sort information. And being able to sort information allows me not to think, wait, cat, hold on, the four-legged creature is tiny, has a long tail, or the four-legged creature is way bigger than me. I don't have to think of all those things. So that's where cognitive biases come from. We are able to sort information quickly and efficiently. Now, implicit biases when it goes into overdrive. For example, I have a friend. We had dinner on my patio a couple of months ago, and we were talking about these kinds of things and racism. And she said, maybe we could do a book study because I know some of my white friends don't have any idea that these things exist. And she's white, and she was saying, the truth be told, if I see a black man on the street and I'm walking alone, I would pull my purse closer and I'd walk a little faster. And it's funny because my son was there, and we were but it was good because we were having a conversation, and he knows this is how I'm perceived, this perceived threat. And in talking about that, I got to say, that's what implicit bias is. It's those pictures that we see. If you follow the looting hashtag right now, everybody is in a hoodie, with the hood pulled up, Christopher, don't go out of the house with a hoodie over your head. Those are those biases that we all have. And that's kind of when it goes into overdrive. We automatically assume that a person, if there's a man in a suit in the elevator, we are especially if it's an office building, we are much less likely to feel threatened. He looks like he belongs. And so we automatically sort people into an us and a them. And so the big thing that I do in the book is I talk about the us's and the thems, and we sort them into our family. My brother was never like us. He was always different. We do that. Our first us is our mama, and then it's our mom and our the adults that care for us. And then after that, we extend to the people who they trust. So those biases are simply our natural way to say this is us and this is them. But how and where we draw that line can disenfranchise certain students. And it's not a black and white thing, it's an everything thing. And that's one of the things I also bring up in Finding Your Blind Spots. There's often a time, for example, if you were the kid you were the nerdy science fair winner who got necked by do you know what necking is? I'm a middle school teacher. Necking is when somebody runs down the hall and slaps you hard on the back of the neck.
No, never heard of that. I never heard that term before. I've seen that action, but I've never heard the term before.
Yeah.
Necking used to mean something else in the 1950s and 60s.
Oh, that's right. That is right. Necking
Showing my age here, I suppose.
I've forgotten. Yeah.
Right,
So no,
right.
necking now is he necked me. So that's
Okay.
Slap on the back of the neck. Okay, so we're clear about that one. That's good. At any rate, if you were that kid, and every day in your class, the 2 or 3 big man on campus types, the jocks, the captain of the football, they come in, you will probably, unless you have really looked inward to let all that go, you will probably have a harder time relating to those kids and an easier time relating to the science fair nerd who they bully. Right. So that is a normal thing. And we really have to, as educators, be aware of what our triggers are. And when there's a whole lot of inside work before at the end of the chapters, you get some outside work to do. But a lot of it is just recognizing what you think about things. When you hear LGBTQ, what do you think? Do you go, oh my God, all these letters? Or do you think, oh yeah, is it, what are your feelings? If you hear Black Lives Matter, Blue Lives Matter, do you feel fondness at one and that the other is threatening? What do you think about these terms? When you hear anti-racist, what does that bring up in you? And once you get to it's kind of like eating mindfully. If you ever are working on weight loss, they tell you to don't eat in front of the TV and just kind of shovel stuff in. Pay attention to what you keep a food journal. That kind of mindfulness is what's called for. And once
Right.
you've gotten that, what you can do about it is to, one of my favorite things to do is to make a list of the students who you have the strongest feelings for and against. That is so, and you don't have to just use your present class. You can use, your whole teaching career and pick 5 students that you really, oh my God, every teacher can think of 4 or 5 students that they were just special.
Mm-hmm.
And every student, and you can usually you can remember 5 that you thought, oh my God. I mean, when I close my eyes and talk about this with you, their names that they come up.
Yeah.
And those people, those kids are usually either kids who are like us and familiar to us in some way. They feel like an us. And the other kids are usually, they feel like a them.
Right.
And when we start to just look at literally in our own classes, how we are navigating relationships with all of our students, then we can begin to look at some things like race and gender identity and all of those other things, and buying the books and getting colored crayons that are different colors. Flesh tone goes from peach to dark ebony. And then we can start doing those things. But first, just noticing how us and them, our kids.
Yeah. That's interesting. The idea of paying attention to your feelings and those internal reactions, almost those visceral, primal reactions that we have in different situations and to different people, really gives us a clue to uncover where some of those biases might be lying dormant, or you may not even realize that they're there. But paying attention to that, I think that mindfulness is great. One of the things I think of, Hedreich, as we talk about bias, and I have this love-hate relationship with social media, because on the one hand, we are told universally to take an honest look at ourselves and be willing to admit. And I think in the general public, we say, listen, you're going to make mistakes. Things are going to happen. You might say something that's offensive. Just own it and apologize for it and move on from it. But the Twitter mob doesn't let you do this. And this is where I think some of the challenges. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but what I see right now is a situation where I think more people like myself, more white people, more just diversity in society, I think more people would be willing to have this more honest conversation about bias and anti-racist work if it wasn't for the fact that the Twitter mob can take you down and make your life. And I'm not talking about the sort of caricature of cancel culture. I don't want to go there. That's not what I'm talking about. But what I am talking about is the idea that your life can be made miserable with one slip of the tongue. The Twitter mob gets a hold of it, and you make some open proclamation that you have implicit bias, and that can be turned against you. So, I think that those on Twitter and Facebook and other social media platforms think they're helping, but it feels like they're making this societal transformation more difficult. Would you subscribe to that? Would you agree with that? And if so, if not, then set me straight. And if so, what do we do about that? How do we have these difficult conversations without? Because I think the fear of that sort of mob mentality is what's stopping so many from having a more honest conversation about race.
I just think we should, and what do we do about this? This is what breaks my heart, because for me, it's simple. Let me talk about my classroom. So in my classroom, there were always 8 things. It was a computer lab, so no eating, no drinking, but and number 8 was kindness and encouragement. And that came on every test the first 9 weeks. I would ask, what's the most important rule in our classroom? And sometimes they would say no eating and drinking, blah, 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 blah. No, guys, it's kindness. And I drummed that in, that the one thing we can do, middle school is hard for everybody. We are not going to make each other's lives miserable. So that whole clap back, snap back kind of a mentality, it was a no-go in my classroom, because I know that those things, even things that are mean, that are said, well, I was just joking. Yeah, but maybe that wasn't a joke to her. Maybe that didn't feel good to him. So we had just a kindness zone. And believe it or not, even with 6th and 7th graders, that does work. And I had a couple of students who said, Miss Nichols, your classroom is just different. And that's because I didn't, just laugh when somebody made a nasty joke about somebody. If they were going to get in trouble, that would be the thing they would get in trouble for. Why did you say that? What if we said that about you? What do you think she felt like when you said that? How do you think that she wanted to react? If I hadn't stopped it, what do you think would have happened? What was gained? Do you feel better about yourself by saying that to her? Because finally, generally, when you snap back, clap back, it's because you don't feel good about yourself. You have to make someone else feel small. So we talked about those kinds of things. And we talked about, what does your grandmama say? If you can't say something nice, don't say anything at all. And it's okay. You can have an opinion without sharing it. And for some reason, we have gotten to a place, it started back with yellow journalism, and now that has spread to where we believe it's cool and cute to, well, he's speaking the truth, keeping it real, 100%. Oh, well, that's why I like him. He says what we're all really thinking. And is that really necessary? Is it good? So I would love to turn back to the place where if we can't say something nice, don't say anything at all. I don't know if you saw the small bites about the teacher in California who did the Sokotoa thing.
Yeah, I did.
And I said, she made an honest mistake. When I looked at her, I saw a teacher who was, oh my God, that was so awful. But I can see she was really just trying to drill it into her kids. She was going for gold, and she didn't know. I fault the school systems that don't teach those kinds of things.
Right.
You know what I mean? And she's in a bubble probably where no one said, hey, guess what? That's not really cool. Why don't you try this instead? So I don't know, Tom. I wish I knew how to get people to stop being mean to one another. I was a little kid who used to come home crying, and my mom would go, what's wrong? I said, well, they don't want to fight. I don't want to play. They just want to fuss and fight. And she'd say, and that's why you're crying? So I've always been a little sensitive to that. I don't understand it. I think life is hard enough. We have, God knows, the last 2 years of life has been traumatic for us all. I don't know why we have to add meanness on top of that. So I got nothing.
I think you're onto something about, this idea that it might be a lot of projection about insecurity, because I think sometimes what makes people, and I haven't experienced this personally, but I think what sometimes makes people feel better is when they can point to somebody else who they perceive to be worse. And so a lot of the meanness that happens on social media, I think, is rooted in insecurity and wondering about our position. And if we can highlight someone else who's much worse than us, then it's a nice distraction from the truth about ourselves that we may have to confront.
And here we are back again, arguing method.
Exactly. Back to method. Very good point, right? We're back to method. We don't like the way they're doing it. But I do think that the way, and I do call it the sort of de-evolution of social media, has really brought us to a place where rudeness and being brash. And I just talked about that in last week's episode about, what happened to us? How did we become so rude and so brazen and so in your face? What happened to civil discourse and real conversations about disagreements, et cetera? I don't know what the answer is either. That's why I brought you, Hedreich. That's why you're here. I'm trying to find out from you how we deal with the Twitter mob.
Well,
but anyway,
I take the chance. I take the opportunity. I think if more of us would say, is that the Sokotoa thing was me saying, hey, teachers, we're struggling. This is the worst year of our career of teaching ever. Right. Why would we dump on somebody? And that, and literally it took me about the Friday episode and the Monday episode, and then a couple of tweets. I couldn't get it off. Like, really, we're complaining about how bad things are, and we're dumping on somebody. Yes, it was a bad mistake, but she made a mistake. Everybody makes one. Is that how you want people to react to you when you make a mistake? No. So step off. So I think if more of us would do that and and more of us would, I don't engage on social media. I don't, I don't get in the clapback culture. Even if something triggers me, I have a friend. I call my friend and say, God, can you believe what they said? Oh my God. That's what friends were for.
Exactly. Yeah,
and so I think if we would just, maybe start, I know I sound so cliche, but, start hey, for the whole month of December, let's all write nothing mean. Let's make a TikTok challenge where we just do that and use social media for that. If we would teach our kids, in school to use social media for something good. That's something we did as a tech teacher. Those are some things that we could and then talk to our kids and then model that. If you say to your kid, be kind, then model that. Model it. If we would just do that, I think we'd be okay.
Yeah, I think you're right. And as cliche as it might sound, I think it is important that there's that mindfulness piece again, which is we have to be aware of what the net result in society is. And I talked about that last week, which is that you might even be right. You might be right. And that person might be wrong. But the end result of the interaction is going to be that we are less than as a society. And is that really what we want to devolve into, our silos and our divisions and all of that, and creating places where we can't have honest conversations without being attacked or without being sort of permanently stained. And I don't know, again, I don't know what the answer is, but I think you're onto something in terms of awareness. And I think the idea of being very intentional, and as corny as it might sound to say, hey, let's talk about positive intentions or positivity, that is probably what's going to get us there. Can we talk for a moment about microaggressions? Because I think, it's interesting. This term gets, it's very sort of normalized now in terms of this idea of microaggressions. People are quite familiar with the term, but I think it's still a concept that eludes some. So I'm wondering if you could just help us understand from your perspective, what is a microaggression? How might we recognize it? And then again, besides just, don't do that, are there things we can do, especially in the education context, maybe bring it to the classroom? What would a microaggression look like? What would it sound like? What do we do about it? How do we move ourselves away from that?
Okay, a microaggression is something that I think everyone's experienced. For example, if you have been, maybe you had a rich boyfriend or girlfriend and you were middle class, or maybe not quite middle class, and they invite you for a ski weekend. And of course your ski gear is, not as swanky as someone else's ski gear. And they don't say, you don't belong here, you're poor, but they say, oh my goodness, where did you find those boots? It's that kind of a catty undertone, catty and subtle disparaging that people do. You don't say something directly, but you maybe remark, oh, interesting shoe choice, those kinds of things. That's a microaggression. It's just, okay. And what you get when you get gender identity and stuff, you'll get gender and racial identity stuff, then you'll get, so I guess you have to wear that on you, to a Muslim girl. I guess you have to wear that on your head, huh? Your religion says you have to, and I didn't say anything wrong, but the way I said it, it was so, it wasn't, oh, so you have to wear a hijab. Cool. Tell me about that. It's, oh, I guess you have to wear that, huh? That kind of a thing. Or, so I get, you're at Harvard as a Black woman, so I guess you're here on scholarship. It's right. Or those kind of remarks that, or I had one once. So how long are you going to wear your hair like that? It was right. I got called into the office for wearing braids before that was in vogue, and it was professional. So those are the kinds of things that come up. They're those little teeny drops that are kind of like water torture. And they take a lot of energy to let roll off your shoulder.
Mm-hmm. You're so articulate, right? That's another one that God, we hear. Yeah. You're so articulate.
You're so pretty for a Black girl.
Right. You don't talk blank, like fill in the blank, right?
Yes.
There's all of those. Yeah. I think sometimes that we, maybe we would call them before passive aggressive, or we would, sometimes I call them a complisult, which is like, it sounds like a compliment, but it's actually an insult.
I like that. Complisult. Yeah.
Complisult. It's like, did I just get complimented, or did you just cut me up there? I don't know what's going on. It's almost like you can't tell. But yeah, I think that, we see these, and we have to obviously be aware. That is where some of our implicit bias will emerge, is when we ourselves are using some of those, maybe inadvertently and mistakenly. We say things, and I guess you hear on scholarship, you should say, yeah, because of my 4.0 or my 4.5 GPA and my 7 AP classes that I took. Yeah, that's why I'm here. I got an academic scholarship.
Yeah.
You can correct them, right?
And you always have to kind of feel like you're defending your place somewhere. So I guess the big thing that we can do is assume that people belong. You know what I mean? Don't assume. There's an Asian comedian who has a wonderful YouTube video called "What Kind of Asian Are You?" And she runs into a guy, and the guy says, "So where are you from?" America. No, but where? Oh, California. Yeah, but where are you from?
Yeah.
Well, Sacramento, East Side. He's just digging. I had a Korean girlfriend once.
Yeah. Great.
So that kind of a thing. So just assuming that people belong would go a long way in reducing the numbers of microaggressions committed.
Absolutely.
Those
Complissalts, right? I guess we just, in one respect, I know this is going to sound oversimplifies, but maybe we just stop otherizing people and thinking about this idea of inclusion, right? Stop
Yep.
otherizing.
Stop
And
otherizing people. Assume
stop.
everybody's a part of your circle.
We're all leaning in. We're not trying to create divisions and otherizing. So, Hedreich, as we finish up today, I want to bring up something from a recent episode, just a recent episode from Small Bites podcast that I listened to. And again, listeners, I would really encourage you to subscribe to it. It's fantastic, and it's the reason Hedreich is here today. You talked about dismantling a system, specifically dismantling systemic racism, through the lens of, and I love this, through the lens of one student at a time, or the one student standing in front of you. So I found that interesting because I think a lot of us, when we think of dismantling systemic racism, we see it as such a daunting task. And what can I, as one individual teacher, or what can I, as one individual principal, what can I do to dismantle an entire system? But you advocate one student at a time, the student that's standing before you. So tell us a little bit more about that. How do we settle into that idea of why that is the most effective way to dismantle the system?
Because all we have is spoons. I came in like a wrecking ball would be great, but we don't have a wrecking ball. A wrecking ball would be, let's say we looked at reparations for the indigenous communities and the descendants of enslaved Africans. First of all, the descendants of enslaved Africans began when, as soon as child rape started to occur within those populations. Then you have this whole mulatto population and all that. So how are we going to go back and look at that and take that out? So what are we going to do? We're going to take a committee from Congress and we're going to talk about giving back land. Are you moving? You know what I mean? I know that I live on occupied lands. So they're going to uproot this. And, like literally, if we go back and take the system out, root out the parts that didn't work from the beginning, and that is a logistical impossibility. So what does dismantling the system look like that we can actually achieve? And first of all, we know that the wealthiest would never go for anything like that. So it's not even a conversation. Right. You know what I mean? I mean, there's some people who'd say, okay, cool, I'll move. Where do you need me to move to? And all right, this is yours. Cool. You got it back. But imagine that if everybody was resituated according to and things were divided equitably. I was like, oh, if I get 40 acres and a mule, can I please have mine in Midtown Manhattan? Mm-hmm. We have to look at what dismantling a system really means, and that's why I say with the one student, we start small. Start by looking at you and being mindful about who you otherize, mm-hmm. What kind of complissalts might come out of your mouth during the day. Start by being mindless and see who in your immediate circle that influences. Because when you do that, then you'll be able to branch out and you won't feel like, oh my God, no, I just can't talk about racism another day. It's just too heavy. I just can't. And that's what happens. You know what I mean? Something like George Floyd happens, and then everybody's up in arms, and then it goes away. It's not in the headlines anymore. It goes away, and we can kind of begin to relax and go back to our lives. Mm-hmm. But when you see a little girl looking through the crayons and drawing a picture, and she's trying to mix a peach and a brown to get her skin color because there's no color, and the peach one says skin color, or that's what we think of, then you can, that Crayola has a skin colors of the world box. Let me get a couple. You can make that small change, or you can read books that have other kinds of characters. How often, as I know when I was a kid, all Dick and Jane were white. And all the characters I read about were white. All the protagonists were white. So you can read stories as a matter of course, not just during Black History Month or Hispanic History Month. Yay, it's September. Let's talk about Frida. Let's talk about different people who've achieved different things throughout the year. So that's what you can do. You can make it not just Black History Month, but have not only the who are the scientists who we know. Well, let's say Neil Armstrong. Everybody knows who Neil Armstrong is, but do we know Ellen Okoa? She's on freaking Twitter. You can get your class to follow her and see what she's doing now. She's like a real living hero. So by doing those kind of things and thinking outside the box, hey, this is the history I know, but whose stories are missing? Ask the question, or ask your question to your students. Who else was there? Hey, we're reading about Thomas Jefferson and his wife died. Who else was there? Well, Sally Hemings. Who was she? His sister-in-law's half-sister, I believe it was. She was his wife's half-sister by the father's enslaved mother, and he fathered many children with her. That's who else was there. She's a whole person, a whole story. So when you ask who else was there, the Pilgrims, yay, happy Thanksgiving. Who else was there? Chief, oh God, I can't say his name. Wakunsana. I can't. That's not right. It's not. I call him Chief Powhatan because that's usually what he's called, and I cannot say his name. I'm so sorry. I'm still practicing that. And when I'm reading it, I can say it, but I can never keep it.
Yeah.
Or his daughter, Pocahontas, was a real person. You know, she was actually the daughter of the chief of the Powhatan Confederation. They were all there, but we only know the stories of the Pilgrims, the British. And so finding out who else was there, those are things we can do on the campus and classroom level to make a difference.
Yeah. Yeah, just one small change at a time. Keep influencing different books, as you say, different main characters, and important that those main characters be in positions of equal success to the other characters, showing intellect, showing character, all of those ideas being set in front of students. Hedreich, I'm happy to have contributed 2 new vocabulary terms to you, because this has really been a fantastic conversation, and I feel like we're going to have to do this again at some point, because I feel like we're just scratching the surface on so many different topics. But as we finish up today, I've got 2 questions left for you. They're questions I ask everyone who comes on the podcast, and you can take the first one in any direction that you want to go in. But educationally speaking, the question is, what keeps you up at night?
Oh, that's a good one. I'm going to let you ask me the second one, because I'm going to tell you what keeps me up at night. Very, very serious. Hold on. Watch me just a second.
All right. You want the second question? The question is, if a random person stopped you on the street and asked you, what's your definition of success? How would you answer them? So let's fold those last 2 questions in together and you work your magic.
I would answer success is knowing that at the end of the day, I am kind, and people know that I'm kind. Yeah, at the end of the day, that I know that I'm not hurting people that I'm in interaction with. That's successful for me. Yes, I want to have money and all of that. This baby's safety. Hello. This is what
there he is.
How are you? What keeps me up at night. This is what keeps me up at night. Thank you. Yeah, I want him to be happy and whole, and I would love to have him be able to live in a world where his children don't experience the things that he's experienced or that I experience. I would like us to, before I become a grandma and those kids get old enough to be in school, I would love for the world to be kinder and saner and move toward that one nation. Because I feel like we're trying to, it's like, why don't we just rip America in half? You go on your side, I go on mine. That's what it's feeling like. And that just breaks my heart. So that's what keeps me up at night. And knowing that what I'm doing with Small Bites and with Finding Your Blind Spots, knowing that those things contribute to that, there's success right there.
Yeah, that is success. And certainly, Hedreich, you are having a big impact and having a major influence on educators throughout North America, or probably around the world, in helping them bring things into perspective and the thinking around all of the work that's necessary. I certainly appreciate it. Listeners, you definitely need to follow Hedreich on Twitter. The Twitter handle is @Hedreich. Instagram, it's @Hedreich Nichols. You can find Hedreich on Facebook and LinkedIn as well. TikTok, Anchor FM, and YouTube. I'm going to have links for all of that in the show notes. So please go there and follow Hedreich. I promise you, it's definitely worth it. And her website as well, www.hedreich.com. Lots of great information there as well, including how you can connect with Hedreich should you want to pursue any equity coaching or consulting with Hedreich. Hedreich, again, as I said earlier, this has been a fascinating conversation for me, and I'm sure listeners really appreciated your perspective, and I certainly appreciate you taking the time to be here. So thanks so much.
Thank you as well, Tom. It's been a pleasure. And thank you for teaching me new words.